Ivan and Iryna, one complete story. Ivan first noticed Iryna on a chilly April morning at a small cafe near the university library. He was a third-year architecture student who came there almost every morning to sketch ideas for his design classes. The cafe had big windows facing the street, and Ivan liked to sit in the corner where he could watch the world go by while he drew. That morning, a young woman entered, shaking raindrops off her umbrella. She chose the table by the window, ordered a cappuccino, and opened a thick book of poems. Her name was Iryna. She was studying literature and had a habit of escaping noisy student dormitories to read in quiet places. At first, they were just two strangers sharing the same space. But one day, Ivan's pencil rolled off the edge of his table and stopped at Iryna's feet. She picked it up, smiled politely, and handed it back. That small exchange opened a tiny door. Ivan, usually shy, asked about the book she was reading. "It's Anna Akhmatova," she replied softly. He nodded, a little embarrassed but curious. The next morning he arrived a bit earlier than usual. When she came in and noticed him, she gave a brief nod, as if they were already acquaintances. Day by day, their greetings turned into small conversations, about classes, about the weather, about the city's hidden cafes. Iryna sometimes glanced at his sketchbook. Ivan sometimes asked about her favorite authors. Weeks passed. They began to share the same table when the cafe was crowded. Iryna would show him passages from the novels she loved, and he would show her his drawings of old houses in the city center. They discovered that they both liked long walks by the river and watching old movies on rainy evenings. One Friday evening, after exams, Ivan asked if she wanted to take a walk instead of just meeting at the cafe. They wandered through quiet streets, talking about their childhoods. His in a small village where he built tree houses, hers in a bustling town where she helped her grandmother sell flowers at the market. That walk became a tradition. Every Friday they would meet somewhere new: the botanical garden, the old railway station, the city's art museum. The more time they spent together, the more natural it felt. Late one evening in May, they were sitting under blooming chestnut trees near the river. Ivan, nervous but determined, told her how much she meant to him. He spoke quietly, afraid to ruin what they already had. Iryna looked at him for a long moment, then smiled, her eyes soft. She admitted she had been waiting for him to say those words. That night, they held hands for the first time as a couple. The following months were filled with small, beautiful rituals: studying together in the library, cooking cheap dinners in tiny student kitchens, taking weekend trips to nearby villages. They met each other's friends, then families. Iryna's grandmother sent even jars of homemade jam. Ivan's younger brother started calling Iryna sister, long before it was official. After graduation, life became more complicated. Ivan got an internship at an architecture firm in another city, while Iryna stayed behind to finish her master's degree. They faced their first real test: distance. The months apart were hard, but they called every evening, shared photos of their days, and visited each other on weekends. Instead of pulling them apart, the distance showed them how strong their bond had become. 2 years later, Iryna moved to the same city. They rented a small apartment with creaky wooden floors and a balcony full of plants. They worked long hours but still found time for their traditions: Friday walks, old movies, cooking together. After a year, Ivan was offered a chance to design his first independent project: a small public library in a nearby town. He worked late nights, sketching plans, worrying about mistakes. Iryna supported him the way he had supported her during exams years before, bringing him tea, listening to his frustrations, gently reminding him to rest. When the library finally opened, she stood proudly in the front row, taking photos as if it were her own achievement too. Iryna also grew in her career. She published a series of articles about Ukrainian poetry and began leading weekend workshops for young writers. Ivan often came to listen, sitting quietly in the back as she read aloud to her students. He loved watching her hands move when she spoke, the same way he had watched her turn pages in the cafe years ago. Their relationship wasn't without difficulties. They argued about money, about chores, about whether to stay in the city or move back home. There were moments of silence at the dinner table, times when their different ambitions seemed to pull them apart. But each time, after the anger cooled, they talked. Sometimes on their balcony at midnight, sometimes on a park bench during their Friday walks. They learned to listen, to apologize, to compromise. In their fourth year together, during a trip to the Carpathian Mountains, Ivan proposed. It wasn't a dramatic gesture, just the two of them on a misty trail with birdsong echoing in the trees. He handed her a simple silver ring he had saved for months to buy. Iryna's eyes filled with tears, and she whispered yes before he even finished his sentence. They married the next summer in a small ceremony surrounded by friends and family. The reception was held in a garden lit with paper lanterns, and Iryna's grandmother baked the cake. It was simple, heartfelt, and exactly what they wanted. Back in the city, they continued to build their life. They renovated their apartment, turning one room into a small studio for Ivan's sketches and Iryna's writing. They started saving for future travels. On weekends, they would take the train to nearby towns, collecting stories and photos. 5 years into their marriage, they welcomed their first child, a girl named Vika. Parenthood changed everything. Sleepless nights, toys scattered across the floor, but also an entirely new kind of joy. Ivan would carry Vika around the apartment while Iryna read bedtime stories, and sometimes all three of them would sit on the balcony watching the city lights flicker below. Even with a child, they fought to keep small pieces of their old rituals alive. On Fridays, they still took their walks, now pushing a stroller through the park, stopping to point out birds and flowers to Vika. When the child grew older, she would ride on Ivan's shoulders, while Iryna told her little stories about the trees and buildings they passed. Both of their careers continued to grow, but at a slower, steadier pace. Ivan's small library project led to other commissions, community centers, a playground, then a new wing for the city's museum. He became known for designing spaces that felt human and warm. Iryna published her first book of essays and began teaching at the university, guiding young students through the same literature she once read at the cafe. Life wasn't always easy. Money was still sometimes tight. Ivan traveled for work. Vika got sick during the winter months. There were days of exhaustion and doubt. Yet, even during hard seasons, they came back to each other. On the nights when Vika finally slept, they would sit quietly on their balcony with tea, watching the city lights, talking about nothing and everything. As the years passed, their apartment transformed from a student's nest into a family home. Bookshelves spread from one room to another. Drawings and poems hung on the walls. Plants overflowed from the balcony. Vika grew into a curious, kind child who loved drawing buildings with her father and writing little poems with her mother. When Vika was 8, they took their first big family trip abroad. A train journey across Europe. Ivan showed her old cathedrals. Iryna showed her famous libraries. They filled a notebook with sketches, pressed flowers, and ticket stubs. That trip became a family treasure, a reminder of how far they had come from the days of a lost pencil in a cafe. By their 15th anniversary, Ivan and Iryna had built not only a career and a family, but a rhythm of life that was uniquely theirs. They had learned to let each other change, to support new dreams, to forgive mistakes, to celebrate small victories. Their love had matured into something quieter but deeper, like a river that flows steadily under the surface. On their anniversary evening, after dinner, they walked hand in hand through the same park where Ivan had first told her his feelings. The chestnut trees were blooming again. Vika ran ahead, laughing, while Ivan and Iryna followed slowly behind, smiling at each other. As Vika grew into a teenager and then a young adult, she started to have her own opinions, her own friends, her own adventures. Sometimes this led to small conflicts about how late she could stay out, about her choice of clothes, about the endless noise of music from her room. Ivan and Iryna tried to guide her without crushing her spirit. On especially tense days, they would all go for a walk, just like before. Somehow, outside under the trees, it was easier to talk, to listen, to understand each other again. When Vika was 16, she won a local competition for young writers with a short story about a girl who builds a library in her village. Ivan smiled when he read it. He saw traces of both of them in her story. Iryna hugged her and whispered, "Do you know how proud we are of you?" Vika just blushed and looked at her shoes. A few years later, Vika left for university in another city. The apartment felt strangely quiet. Ivan and Iryna still had each other, their work, their friends, but the silence after she left reminded them of the years that had passed. On Fridays, they still walked, sometimes hand in hand, sometimes just side by side, talking about Vika's calls, her new friends, her classes. They visited her often, sending her care packages of homemade jam and warm sweaters. When she came home for holidays, the apartment lit up again with laughter and music. Vika would tell them about her lectures, her first internships, her plans to travel abroad. Ivan and Iryna listened, proud and a little nostalgic. When Vika graduated from university, Ivan and Iryna sat in the front row of the auditorium, holding hands just like they had on her first day of school. After graduation, Vika found work at a publishing house in the capital. It was far from their city, but she had dreamed about it for years. She rented a small apartment, started editing young authors, and even began writing her own novel at night. Ivan and Iryna visited her a few times each season. They would walk the streets together, Vika showing them her new world, just as they had once shown her cathedrals and libraries on their travels. As the years went by, Ivan's architecture studio grew. He hired younger architects, mentored them, and slowly shifted from designing every detail to guiding projects. Iryna became a respected lecturer, publishing more essays and speaking at conferences. They weren't chasing success anymore. They were building something lasting.